welcome Susan Guthrie to our Power Speaker series this month. First of all, she's amazing. She is a powerhouse divorce attorney, or was. And I'll let her tell her story. She can do this better. But until she saw the need to take a different approach to the way we think about divorce and the way we think about decoupling, and also how we think about the role of addiction and how it plays into couples that are facing a divorce situation. So this is a pretty very important topic, because how people handle divorce can have a material impact on those around them, specifically the children. With that, Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm very excited to be here with you. Thank you so much for this opportunity and for gifting your time to this very, very important topic.
Rachel, thank you so much. And thank you to Healing Springs Ranch. And I'm just so thrilled to be here. I told you earlier, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, both professionally and personally. And that has a lot to do with why I'm thrilled to be here today talking about this, and why I spend as much of my time as possible talking about divorce, approaching it differently. I like the term you use, decoupling, and all of the different things that I've learned in 30 plus. I think it's coming up on 32 years as a divorce practitioner. And the person and the practitioner that I am today is a very different practitioner than I was 30 some odd years ago. And much of that has been colored by my personal journey. When I first got out of law school back 30 plus years ago, it was really a world of divorce through litigation, through treating it like any other lawsuit, where you had party A versus party B, and somebody was a winner and somebody was a loser. It was a very adversarial system, and that's how I really learned, cut my teeth, and turned out I was pretty good at that, and built a very successful career I was in Fairfield County, Connecticut, which is sort of a feeder community from Manhattan, and a very wealthy community. But then, I went through I had a few changes in my life that really kind of led to awakenings that mirrored into my career. The first one was that I got married and then divorced someone with an active alcohol addiction. And then I met my second husband, who was going through, or had gone through, a high conflict divorce, and had 3 little children who were right in front of me, being affected by that conflict. Really one of the most pivotal moments in my life, seeing those little faces. And then my father, who had an active alcohol addiction for most of my life, passed away in his early 70s from cirrhosis and cancer of the liver. And, those things all really just converged for me to have me make a myriad of changes in my approach to divorce. And I went from being a divorce attorney, litigator, to a divorce mediator, which I call a better way to divorce. And I'll talk more about that. But then really now I speak more than I actually mediate, and I try to educate people. I have a podcast and talk a great deal about how people can divorce in a better way. And part of that, I think, is very important, that we look at dealing with mental health issues, because they are so often intertwined into the divorce process. And frankly, they're villainized most often in the divorce process, certainly in the traditional approach. And that has only been more destructive for families. So again, talking about, that intersection of addiction and recovery with divorce and co-parenting, I think, is a place where we really need to shine a lot of light. There is not for the legal profession, there is not a great deal of education that goes on.
No, I'm glad you're here today, because you're right. I know from my personal situation, I went through a divorce, and I was dealing with a spouse that was dealing with some addictive patterns. And really and truly, the treatment facility actually pit us against each other when it wasn't a contentious situation. It was more of this is where we are. We're going to have to deal with the reality of where we are, but why are you provoking us? And so we ended up going to outpatient therapy to decouple in a peaceful way. So I jokingly said we're the only people in marriage counseling to get divorced. And I credit, and then we've actually had this particular therapist speak to our community at times. I credit him with really helping us take approach much like what you're talking about. So share with us and in the group kind of what you want everyone to leave with today after we're done, and really understanding about how divorce can happen and where the true impact or destruction can really lie in a contentious divorce versus one that's done more peacefully through maybe a mediation or working together, collaboration between two partners who once loved each other and in many situations chose to procreate with each other. And now they're going to exit that relationship. How do you lovingly leave that? So I know it's a lot in that question there, but I think if you could share what you want us to leave with, and then secondly, talking a little bit about how that process can work.
Yeah, and I love that progression of a question, Rachel, because it really defines what I am here, or what I like to talk about, and why I think this is such an important question. And it really starts with, just as with how you approach dealing with recovery, dealing with addiction, how you approach dealing with decoupling or a divorce. And it's from the get-go. I think one of the most important times is at that very beginning. And whether you approach it as a team or you approach it as adversaries. And those are really the two differences. In what you just described with your ex-spouse is that team approach, where the two of you, rather than choosing an approach that pitted you against each other, where someone was going to be right and someone was going to be wrong, you found a path with help, which almost everyone is going to need in that point, in that moment in time, but a way to do that so that you were approaching the decisions about how you were going to decouple as a unit, even if you weren't going to be a unit going forward. And I think that is one of the key messages. The problem is when you layer in the difficult emotions around divorce, right? We have fear, we have anger, we have, feelings of betrayal, so much emotion around divorce. And then you layer on what usually, if you have a person with addictive behaviors involved in this relationship, you layer on even more probably what you might tick off as negative incidents in that relationship. And they can be all different kinds of things. They can be betrayals, they can be financial issues in the relationship, they can be lying, there's so much that goes on. And unfortunately, when there are children, especially when there are children involved, what happens in almost all of the divorces that I have been involved in over these 30 years, when you have someone with an addiction issue, is it's that person becomes all bad, all villain, and it all becomes about, alienating or taking that person out of the picture. And the entire, the family structure can never recover from that, or has a very difficult time recovering from that. And the legal system is built to create that divide. And that's what I like to let people know about from the very beginning. If you choose to litigate a divorce and you add in an addiction issue on top of that, you are going to end up with an almost insurmountable divide between the two parties, because the system is built to take what has happened in the past and use that information to win your case, to make your case, right? Why that person should get less of the money, why that person should not have as much parenting time, why the children need to be protected from that parent, why, all of the, I'm the better person, you're not the better person. And, that is a system that is clearly just going to leave two people on each side of the chasm.
So one of the things I heard when I was going through this process that was just such great wisdom was the fact that if you're going to villainize your partner that you may be divorcing, and you're going to do that in a way in front of your children to make them the bad guy or gal, or to really condemn them for what they've done, you are assaulting, not realizing it, your child indirectly so, because they are half that person. And that child can internalize that piece that I'm half bad, when that's not the case at all. And you know, that was something I learned. And the second thing that I learned that I thought was really important is there's no such thing as someone who's all bad, you know, and there's no such thing as someone who has all the problems. The reality of it is, if you find yourself in a relationship with someone that's struggling with addiction, there's work you have to do and own. And one of the most beautiful things I think that comes about is when people can own their own stuff, and they feel strong enough from an ego strength to say, you know, you're right, I didn't handle that well, I could have done that differently, I'm sorry. Recognizing that the marriage is not saved, may not be able to be saved, but a new relationship has to evolve, especially if you have children, or you have some sort of relationship. I know couples that work together and they stay working together post divorce, but it's about recognizing these short-term decisions that you make, or these kind of off the cuff comments that you make, have long-term lasting implications with children, and they carry around that baggage. And I think one of the things we talk about Healing Springs is, you know, that trauma can be handed down generationally. And we don't want to give that to our kids, who then give that to our grandkids, and so on. And so when you're working with couples, what are some things that you do, and kind of helping them come to that level of being able to mediate something that maybe there's infidelity, a financial or sexual infidelity, the heavy stuff, the really hurts really hard type of stuff. What are some of the things that you advise your clients, or things that you do with them to kind of help them through that process?
Yeah, it's such a good point, because we see that all the time where, you know, everybody thinks mediation is the kumbaya way to get divorced, right? You have to be getting along, and you have to be super amicable to end up in mediation. And in fact, that's not true. I do quite a bit of high conflict mediation, and quite a bit where we have people who are struggling with addictions. I even do some domestic violence cases. But the issue is when you get people into that situation where you have them both either, I do all my mediations online. So when they're in the mediation space together, I do try to keep the two of them together as much as possible so that they can hear each other and speak to each other, because often they need to have some conversations around some of what has happened. I don't want to minimize that often really bad behavior can go on when, you know, in every breaking down marriage that's breaking down, but certainly in cases where people have addiction issues, there have been some terrible things that have happened. But in order to face those things, I think what you said is just so critical. One, you have to hear from that person that has in some way violated your trust, or has you know, done something that has eroded that communication path. But you also need to be able to turn that light inward a bit. And the problem, well, not the problem with divorce, but the phenomena of divorce is that as human beings, it is much easier for us to just have it all be their fault. It is much easier for us to get through divorce, hearing our friends go, well, yeah, he was a jerk, you're better off without her, you know, whatever those things might be. And so we become very entrenched in that it's all their fault and I'm the victim. And unfortunately, addiction just solidifies that even further because the behaviors tend to be so extreme. So when we're in a mediation, you know, I realize that we have to actually address those elephants in the room. And in a mediation, you know, I'm not there to deal with the mental health and the therapeutic aspects of that. And I firmly advise everyone going through a divorce to get some support outside. Your mediator is not that person. Your divorce attorney is not that person. Everyone should probably have a therapist, and I'm a firm believer in coaches as well. But I do think that within the structure of the divorce process, we need to talk about where the issues are. So let's pick one. There's an issue around the safety of the children when they're with a parent who has an active alcohol or drug addiction, or one parent believes the other parent has an active alcohol or drug addiction. It doesn't even matter, right? If it's true or not. It can be very hard to even prove whether that's true or not. We can talk about that. But so you're sitting in this room talking about a parenting plan where you have one parent adamant that the other parent shouldn't be alone with the children because it's not safe. So the discussion needs to come around, what can we do in a legal fashion in crafting an agreement that is going to ensure the safety of your children, but still allow your children to have access to their other parent. And that can be a very slow, small increment, but you have to focus in on, well, yes, I understand what you're saying the problem is. How can we fix it? How can we address it? And usually I'll try to do that in small sort of baby steps, so that people can be comfortable with that process.
So, one of the things that you and I've talked about that I think would be great for this viewership group here we have here is oftentimes you get into clients with specific license, whether it's a financial series 6, whatever it might be, or a law license or an MD or an RN, some sort of professional licensure. And the fear around the addiction piece and potentially divorce is not only is this going to be used against me in a divorce situation, but it could have a negative and adverse effect on my ability to earn a living. And so there's fear sometimes around people seeking treatment and help because they don't want people to know they're struggling. And we see sometimes that is a very difficult choice when there's a lot more, or there's a belief that there's so much more at risk in terms of losing a license and letting that be the ammunition in a divorce. So what are some of the things that you see in the industry as you work with professionals that carry these licenses that want help but are often scared or concerned or shy away from seeking treatment because of the visibility, or even high net worth people? They don't want the press, they don't want it, the information getting out. What are some of the things that you see out there, and how do you advise these folks?
So it's a really common issue, unfortunately. And I do think that we see situations across the board, people from all different backgrounds who are afraid to seek treatment during a divorce situation because they're afraid that seeking of treatment means that it's admitting they have an issue that's going to be used against them. But certainly when it comes to licensed professionals, it goes even further. And I know among my profession of attorneys, as well as physicians, financial professionals, this can be a truly huge stumbling block, because not only can it affect your ability to earn money going forward to carry out your profession, because it might damage your reputation, but it also exposes you to potential liability for any time if your former clients hear that you had an addiction issue during a time frame where you represented them, where you treated them as a physician. You may be opening yourself up to potential malpractice claims or more. So it becomes a really huge issue within these professions. The big thing that I try to work with, at least within that divorce space, is the first thing that I think the person who is not dealing personally with the addiction issue needs to understand is, although it's a quick and easy, satisfying weapon to throw out that addiction to harm your spouse or soon to be ex, you are actually affecting the future, not only of your soon to be ex, but your future. If you were expecting to rely upon that person for support, for alimony, for child support, for co-parenting, and you are eliminating a parent for your children in a certain fashion. And so what people have to do at a time where they're not wanting to do it. And I'm focusing very much, I'm not even focusing in most of what I'm saying on the person with the addiction issue. I'm really focusing on the person who's dealing with the person with the addiction issue, is because they're really where the focus needs to be, because they have a lot of the control. If they can give some great, I call it the grace of space, to the person with the addiction issue, and that person is willing to get treatment, the entire family system is actually going to be infinitely better off if that person can get treatment in a cone of confidentiality, within a space where they have the knowing and grace of knowing that this is not going to be used against them. Divorce proceedings are not going to be filed, and custody orders barring them from their children entered while they go off to Healing Springs Ranch or some other treatment facility. And that is a future-based way to approach this, as opposed to what I was talking about earlier, which litigation is all based on what's happened in the past. And so for a professional, with licensure, without licensure, or anyone who's seeking divorce, it's really a focus on the person who is dealing with that person who has the addiction issue. They have that ability to give that grace of space. Now, if the person who has the addiction issue is not willing to get treatment, that is a different matter. But, you know, there is a very real reluctance on the part of especially physicians and lawyers, who, by the way, I think are among the number one and number two most addicted professions, to get any type of treatment. In fact, I have colleagues who clearly have struggled with issues over the years, and have spoken with them and tried to help. And it is a very difficult thing within the community to try to help professionals in that range. And it's usually the fear of damage to the profession, but also fear in the realm of the divorce court.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I think, you know, I mentioned that one of the treatment facilities that my former husband went to tried to pit us against each other. And the truth of the matter is, we had already determined that we were going to work through this somehow and come out amiable on the other side. That required me to do my own work individually, him to do his own work, and then us to do work together. And something that really, and this is why I came into this industry, it's because of that story, but something that really, another nugget of wisdom, which I realized as I went through this whole process, I was getting little nuggets of wisdom that, you know, I'm building this encyclopedia to share the things that helped me. And one of the things, once I understood the role trauma played in addiction and mental health and how all these things come together, and I realized the addiction wasn't the problem, it was a solution. And once he allowed me to be part of his support system and understand the trauma that he endured as a child, my entire outlook on this whole process shifted from anger. I still had to work through my own pain and hurts, but it shifted from anger to one of compassion. And it allowed me to see him as a human being that's hurt. And if I continue to berate him and deprive him of his children or those kinds of things, if I were to do those things, I'm only reinforcing the pain on someone who's deeply hurt and is struggling to figure out how to fix that pain. I'm only contributing. So I almost become, you know, the perpetrator at that point. And, you know, and to your point, there's a lot of power in the person that's not struggling, and to use information against that person. And so one of the things we try to do at Healing Springs when we talk to the families is to make sure that the families understand you have an important role, and it's not to be the villain. These folks are struggling with demons and hurts and pains that, you know, they are trying to work through. Why in the world would any human being add that to another person? That seems like the definition of cruel to me. But I don't want to minimize the experience that, you know, the people that are in the spouse partner relationship are having, because there's pain. And really the only way, it's not nothing they can do is going to fix your pain. You have to fix your pain.
Yeah.
And that's something I like I said, these little nuggets that I learned. And that's one of the reasons why I so love talking to you, because you share those same beliefs, but you take it to another level for me. I know we said we are going to take questions at the end, but we have a couple questions that are coming in text on my phone. And they kind of tie into this moment right now, if that's okay, if I can ask you these questions.
I love answering questions. So.
Okay, so this is about the court system. And so one of them, the first one that comes in from our client base, so shout out to the clients at Healing Springs, is why in divorce is it difficult for the fathers? There seems to be more favoritism toward the mothers in terms of custody and visitation and those types of things. Why is that?
You know, it goes back to a societal norm. You know, when I first got out of law school 30 plus years ago, just custody in general always looked like mom gets, primary custody and dad has every other weekend and one night during the week. That was standard. That was almost like, we could just stamp it on the agreement and be done with it. And there is still, and I don't think it's just the court system. I think we live our lives in many ways along with that gender, stereotyped lifestyle. I still, 30 plus years later, still see many, many stay-at-home moms and many, many breadwinner dads. It's still a norm. And then when, you go into court and suddenly you're going to be a 2-household family, courts still have a bit of a gender bias toward that stereotype. Now it is changing. You are definitely seeing a great deal more what we call shared custody or shared 50-50 parenting, whatever you want to call that. But even within that context, we still see what we might call 50-50 parenting. But if one of the kids is sick during the week, and is supposed to be at school and it's supposed to be dad's week or whatever time, but dad's going to still go to work and the kid's mom will take care of the child who's sick. So we still even see a little lingering of that gender bias. The other part is, you have to, our bench is slowly changing. The judges who are deciding these cases and making these laws and putting out the case law, there's starting to be less older males, but we're getting more people who look a little more diverse and who are younger and who are female, but we're still dealing with a judiciary that in many ways is, patriarchal. So it's just, it's that flipping. Now I will say on the other hand, I have had and represented many fathers who were the breadwinner, went off every day, saw their kids in the evening when they came home, and then a divorce happened in that family, and dads wanted to be a 50-50 parent. They wanted to have half that time with the children or whatever you want to call that shared schedule, and they made changes, and because it requires a great deal of changing things around in order to suddenly become a single full-time parent when your children are with you. But the trend is shifting. It is, but you still do see, and a part of it I would say is not because on most men's part that they are not willing to take on fully partnered co-parenting. Women are very resistant, and I always get a lot of flack for this, but this is what I see anecdotally in my practice. Women are very reluctant to give up primary caregiver status. There's something about I am the mother, I am a mother, I am their mother, that is very hard, that goes to the identity of many women, that is difficult for them. So that, you're fighting against that as well. And it's not right or wrong. It's just something that I've noticed over the years.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. We have a question too that came in from one of our interventionist industry friends that I'm going to read it so I make sure I get everything in here. It says, generally speaking, how do family law courts view addiction with respect to a parent with young children who's struggling with an active substance use disorder? That is it viewed as a chronic yet treatable and manageable condition? And if so, how does the family law court protect children from the risks associated with living with a parent with an active substance use disorder?
Yeah, the key, such a good question. And the key really is that word active. I will say this is a discussion I've had with clients over and over again. When they are dealing with an allegation in a divorce case of active addiction, that they are, have an active addiction and represent a threat of harm to their children. The courts generally are educated enough these days to know that addiction can be treated, but it is a ongoing issue how you prove, and remember, we're in a court, right? It's all about evidence. It's very difficult in a courtroom to prove you're sober, to prove that you are not actively in the throes of your addiction. And so it becomes a situation. There are two ways to essentially deal with it. Judges want to see a time frame of good behavior, of behavior that exemplifies a person who has, who is in recovery. So if you have gone to treatment, if you are going to AA or NA or whatever your A might be, that will weigh in with the judge. But generally, judges are going to err on the side of caution if there's an allegation of an active addiction. And depending on what we have such a broad range of addictions. If it is something that, if it's a shopping addiction, that may not bear on relative harm to the children. If it is an active alcohol or drug addiction, it very well might make a parent incompetent at some point in time during their parenting time. So judges are going to usually order supervised parenting until the parent shows that the parent with the addiction issue shows that they have their addiction in recovery or under control. And again, that is really difficult. That this is where people who are doing the right thing and getting treatment are still somewhat penalized, because the fact that they're in treatment isn't enough. There has to be more proof for many judges. So that's where it becomes a difficult thing. And that's usually drug testing, or, if we're dealing with drug or alcohol addiction, or something like SoberLink, which, I'm a huge fan. I mentioned to Rachel ahead of time that I started using that with clients because it's one of the fastest, quickest ways to deal with allegations of substance abuse.
Yep. Well, and there's a flip side to that too. I had a friend who lost custody of his children because he was dealing with a very powerful drug addiction situation. And he went to treatment, was successful in treatment, and he was angry that as part of his divorce decree, it was you would submit to regular drug testing, hair testing, fingernail testing, whatever. It was a whole host of different things. And basically there was no finite timeline to when that would end. He's like, hey, how long do I have to do that? And why is she up in my business? And, all this kind of stuff. And I said, well, you need to change your mindset, because this is actually protective for you. Because if you're submitting to this and it shows up, you are not doing anything wrong, then if something, first of all, you're earning credit back and trust points back with your former spouse, but also too, if something were to happen, that spouse can't then use that against you in another type of custody battle, or they're trying to seize or, revoking your parental rights. So I said, I think you need to embrace and say, this is like the best thing I can do. If I'm going to be clean, I will happily submit to whatever you need me to do to make sure that you're comfortable with what's going on, and that, the children are comfortable, whatever that may be. And so I said to him, why don't you see this as a positive thing? I know it's a pain in the butt factor, but it's a positive thing. It's actually very protective. So SoberLink, any of those types of services where you're agreeing to having random testing done throughout the day and submitting that to whether it's a court or just even to giving it to a former spouse. We had a client that came through, and part of his recovery process was to have these tests. He paid for his own hair tests. He gave it to the results to his ex-wife, his parents, and us. And I said, why are you giving it to us? And he said, because you're part of my support system. And he said, I want you all to see the good work I'm doing. And he did for years, until he finally said, I don't have to do this anymore. And his ex-wife was like, I'm comfortable with where you are in your sobriety, and we're good. You don't have to keep doing this. And so, he did it until she was fine with it. And so I encourage folks that if there's things like that you need to do, see that as a gift. And it's a gift of being able to say, I'm telling you the truth and I can prove it. And versus someone trying to get all up in your business and be nosy about what you're doing. If you're not doing anything wrong, you should want to sing that from the rafters and prove that from the rafters. So I appreciate the plug for SoberLink and really making sure that people know there are tools out there that you can use and agree to that will help build that trust back, which is essential. That's usually what's been violated in the
Yeah.
process. Trust,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. And it's, as I said, proving sobriety is very hard. You're 100% correct. It is a gift to be able to prove your sobriety. It is what will gain your time back with your children in a judge's eyes. Well, this person has shown me 6 months of clean tests. Why would I not believe that this person is in, sobriety? Whereas your former spouse, without those tests, unfortunately, and I've seen many, many cases where the addiction issue is thrown out there and it's not necessarily true. It is also used as a weapon just very often, well, he's an alcoholic, she's a drug addict, she pops too many pills, this, that. It gets thrown around a great deal. And I'm not minimizing, some people do have an addiction issue, but if you are a person sitting there who's having that allegation made, how do you prove you don't have a drug or alcohol issue, right? You can prove it. That's where SoberLink or drug urine, hair testing, nail testing, whatever testing you can get done. I agree with you. And I've had that difficult talk with clients for years, having to do that mental shift that you were just talking about, where they feel like it's intrusive. The other thing I would say is to people is, even if you had a court order that said, father shall submit to random drug testing, whatever it might say, that doesn't mean that after a period of time of clean tests, you couldn't move to modify that order. No orders that are in the best interest of the children are permanent. They can always be changed. So just as you said, but often if you can put your co-parent into a mind frame or a mindset that you are not posing a threat to the children, then often the issue can go away or it can be put aside.
That's great. We have a question that came in from a therapist. And this is the question. What is your approach when a couple comes in for mediation and one is accusing the other of substance abuse? I have seen situations where the accuser is actually the bully. How do you make sure this doesn't happen, or that you don't give the perception that you're siding with one over the other? Ties directly into what you were just saying, that used as a weapon.
Oh yeah. And it's a great weapon, right? Because it is so hard to prove one way or the other. So that's not an uncommon situation in a mediation. I get that. I was reading some statistics to get ready for this talk today, and it said something like 50% of divorces have some sort of addiction issue. That actually is way low based on my, just history of practice. I would say there's allegations of addiction issues much higher, probably 75 to 80% in what I've had. Is there always an issue? Again, who knows? But when I have a couple that comes in and we have a bullying situation, any type of bullying situation, often I will separate them into separate rooms so that I can talk to them separately and give the person who might be feeling bullied the opportunity to speak to me directly without the influence of the other person there. But it also gives me a chance to dive into why those allegations are coming from the person, where they are coming from. Well, what makes you think that your spouse has an addiction issue? What are the situations that we need to look into? Why do you think they're unsafe? What are we talking about? The other aspects are that I am a huge believer in an integrative approach to the mediation. I am not the only professional who should be involved in most cases. And so if this is something that comes up early on, and before I start a mediation, I do a private meeting with each client. So I would usually know about this before we ever brought them together to talk. And I would probably be making recommendations for support people, therapists, again, if there, would a drug testing or would an alcohol testing or would SoberLink be an issue or be something that might be helpful to resolve this issue, so that the sooner you can take the issue off the table, the sooner you can move the people forward. So I don't brush it under the table, but if there's true bullying going on, I will often separate people into those separate rooms. It takes my neutrality off the table as well.
I think you said something really, really important that I want to dial in, is that it's a team effort. And to your point, having various professionals involved in this that are there to really help and assist these two people, regardless of where they, end up at divorce or married, actually fixing the problems, regardless of what happens, is that it is a team of professionals that should be working together. And there should be, in my opinion, permission given to helping working together so that the team can help move the couple forward to whatever the destination is that they want to get to. And I could see that where clinicians could leverage your skill set, you could leverage their skill set as part of these teams that bring different professional elements and aspects to the treating of the couple and having a healthy approach. There's another question that came in from our dear friend, Phil. Hi, Phil. What would you do if you find you can't mediate? How do you refer now that you have a relationship with both parties?
So that is, I don't usually refer one, I would say I haven't had that many cases where the people have dropped out of mediation. Most of the time we're able to get them to the close, again, because it's not usually a matter that you can't mediate. It's usually a matter that there's not the correct support team in place. And I really want to emphasize the integrative team approach. Many people have heard of collaborative divorce and that approach. I essentially work the same way in mediation, except there's a neutral in the room, right? There's one neutral or two neutrals. I often will work with a co-mediator who is a therapist if we have addiction issues or mental health issues in the case. But usually it's a matter of somebody needs some sort of support. Someone needs a coach, someone needs a therapist, someone needs a financial advisor because they're not able to function within the mediation. If the people want to refer out, I do provide people with just a general list of preferred providers. And I have that for all of my cases and all different kinds of professionals. So I wouldn't give one of them one attorney and the other person a referral to a different attorney. I would give them both the exact same list and suggest, and I'm usually going to be referring them to collaborative attorneys who are collaboratively trained, and many of them are also mediators because what happens is many people will leave mediation and go directly to like ground zero litigation because they think, well, mediation didn't work. Now we got to go the hard way. And it's not necessarily true. It's actually not very often true. Only a very small percentage of cases actually need to be litigated. Over 95% of divorce cases go to judgment with an agreement. That means between 3 and 4% need to be tried. And the rest of them, people just find a way to come to agreement.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. Let me ask you this, because something you said to me a lot, maybe when we first talked, the first time we ever met, you said something to the effect of when you were doing divorces and you were doing very oftentimes contentious divorces and you're representing one party and your goal was to win for that one party, whatever it is that that party was fighting for. And you saw that, and this is where I think your fulfillment in what you were doing shifted when you saw, yeah, your client might have won, but at the end of the day, the children lost in some way, shape or form. And so you started shifting some of your time looking at the children, and you talked about a project that you'd been working on or associated with that actually is looking and doing a study, for lack of a better word, on children that have been part of contentious divorces and peaceful divorces. And there's a marked difference in those children from what you shared with me and kind of observable facts, how they do in school, self-esteem, those kinds of things. Can you share a little bit more about some of the patterns you see of those two different groups, and so that people can understand the impact that it has on their children, whether they see it or not at the time?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up because it's so near and dear to my heart. So it's actually a series of 2 documentary films. The first one is already out. It's called Split the Film. The filmmaker is Ellen Bruno. And Ellen, normally the films she makes are about genocide and leprosy and sex trafficking. But she did about 6 years ago, she did a series of interviews with children who were 5, 6, and 7, whose parents had gone or were going through divorce. And these are just I mean, truly the screen is a child's face answering questions about what divorce is like for children. And this is a very, very powerful tool to see the divorce through the eyes of children. You earlier referenced, Rachel, how children are 50% of each parent. So if you denigrate one parent to the child, you're actually denigrating half of that child. And I always thought, well, children are smart enough to figure that out, right? That can't be true. They know you're mad at the adult, not them. There's a little boy in the film who says, you know, he says a bunch of things his mom has said about his dad. And then at the end of that, he says, I think she must hate me as much as him because I really look a lot like him. And your heart just breaks, right? I mean, it just breaks. But then, so Ellen has done a follow-up film now that's just about to come out. I think it's going to come out next month, called Split Teens. And it's those same children now 6, 7 years after their parents' divorce, so that you can see the progression of how their parents' divorce impacted them. And there's never, because it's just the children talking, there's never a narrator who says, okay, here's Amy, whose parents had a contentious divorce. Here's Billy, whose parents had an amicable divorce. But trust me, when you hear what these children say, you know that Amy's parents had a contentious divorce, and you know that Billy's parents had an amicable divorce, and it is heart-wrenching. There's impacts, I won't lie, there's impacts clearly on both sides of the fence. Divorce impacts your children, but the difference between how a high impact divorce and a more amicable divorce impacts children, where parents are able to co-parent, is vastly visible in these films. They're available, anyone can watch them. The first one is available at splitfilm.org, O-R-G. And Ellen, and again, if people want to watch my website, Divorce and Beyond Pod, I actually have a podcast with Ellen talking about the first film, but the second one, we're going to announce the premiere of the second film. I think we're going to be able to do it in July, we hope.
No, that's great. I'm really impressed with the work you're doing around this, and really leading a crusade to educate people. You know, I myself was, my parents divorced, and it was a contentious divorce. And I saw the effects and the impact. And so I think that helped me change my mindset when I went into my own divorce situation. And I learned a tool or a phrase with my kids when they would ask for details about, why is this happening? What did dad do? What did you do? My answer was, it's an adult topic. I'm expecting you to be the kids and enjoy your life, be kids, do what kids do. You don't need to be saddled with adult topics at this juncture. And this is about a relationship between me and your father, not me, your father, and you. You know, so basically, in a nice way, letting them know that there's aspects of this relationship, it's none of your business.
Right.
And that, you know, we're going to work on it. Our job is to work on it as the adults. We're expected to be the adults in the room, and your job is to be the kid. And when my son felt some need to step up as the man in the household, when my former husband went to treatment, I said, I'm not expecting you to be the man of the household. I'm expecting you to be the young man and the son of this family, and do what boys do at this age. And, you know, I gave him permission to not carry around any responsibility, and my daughter as well. But it often meant that I had to sometimes go and grieve in private, to not put that on them, because I realized how observant and how intuitive kids are. We think we're fooling them. You
never
see these things. And the person that's struggling often in the marriage, you know, and maybe with some sort of substance use disorder or addictive pattern, thinks that no one sees it. And those children are brilliant. And oftentimes they're forced to keep those secrets on the behalf of that parent that's struggling, because they don't want something bad to happen to that parent. And so they're harboring all these secrets that, you know, we say, you know, that you're only as sick as the secrets you keep. And so these children are taking on the secrets. Well, I can't tell mom I saw dad drinking out of the vodka bottle, or I can't tell dad that mom went to the pharmacy again. And so these kids become the cesspool of secrets in the family. And that's something that I hope that, as you know, we as a society look at when there's a divorce situation, we look at the impact beyond just how they're emotionally acting, but what are they not telling you that's going on internally that they may not even have the words for, you know?
Right.
I think that's something, if that is something that mediation can bring out, and in recognizing parents, this is your role. There are adult topics, it's not to involve the kids. And even, you know, doing things in an age appropriate way. You know, if there is need to know information with the kids, there's details and there's graphic details, you know? And I commend, again, another therapist that really did a great job delineating what needed to be shared and what didn't need to be shared for the sake of healing a family unit. And I think in divorce, it's like everything goes. People start throwing everything in there, the kitchen sink and everything they could possibly think of that's happened in their marriage to blame someone else. So I love the work that you're doing, and that you're doing a lot of work to help people recognize the kids' role, but you're also doing a lot of work to try to, the extent that you can, make this a collaborative type of arrangement, and looking toward, you know, a way that the two people, even if there's motion involved between the two, can get to a healthier way of separating or divorcing or even reconciling at some, you know, I'm guessing you see that too. Is that something when they go through mediation that sometimes the reconciliation can come out of that?
It's interesting because certainly when I litigated, I don't think in 20 some odd years had any reconciliations. And then I transitioned to a mediative practice, and I would start to have about 5 or so reconciliations each year. And part of that is just that process of mediation is also starts the communication again, starts forging those pathways that have broken down. But I do want to highlight something that you said about your experience, which I think is really important for people, is when you were talking to your children. First off, you were talking to your children. So many adults going through divorce have a mental discussion with themselves along the lines of what you said to your children, but they never actually talk to their children about the fact that, you know, mom and dad, or mom and dad are, you know, having their own adult issues, and you don't need to worry about this. And we both love you. And, you know, this is all going to work out. Or they will have that discussion with the children once. And it's not really a one-off conversation, because so many things are going to continue to happen. Children need to hear all along, you know, that we're working on things, or we're doing this, or we're doing that. You don't need to worry about it. And that parentifying of the children, especially where there are addiction issues involved, because often that starts way before a divorce happens. When you have a parent who's dealing with active addiction and is gone mentally, or, you know, in a certain sense, even if they're physically present, very often children have already become somewhat parentified. So when the divorce actually happens, sometimes they kick that up a notch. Sometimes they're already there. But yeah, having those conversations with your children without vilifying that other parent who's struggling. And unfortunately, that's, you know, I was having this conversation a little bit earlier. Very often the languaging that we use when a parent has an active addiction makes the child fear that parent, makes the child feel that parent is unsafe to them. And that is a visceral feeling that is very difficult for then that parent to overcome, even if they are able to maintain sobriety. And that's harmful to the children as well. Children really do, except in really rare cases, I believe, need both their parents.
Yeah, they do. And each parent brings something different to the table. And kids want their parents, you know, they want their parents, but they want healthy parents too.
Yep.
And, you know, it's our job to show up, even when we're in pain, to show up in a way that's responsible as adults, to not saddle our children with the next generation of anxiety and depression and PTSD. and all of those things. Again, as we mentioned at the beginning of this, you know, that it can become a generational thing that we hand down. So I know we've been hitting these questions during this conversation, and I much appreciate your willingness to kind of ebb and flow. I want to open it up because we're almost about time. If there are any other questions, I think I fed the ones that I've been getting. I know that before we close, folks, and maybe we could do this right now while we're waiting for any more questions to come in, could have you say the film again and where people can get that. Someone's asked for that again.
Sure. It's called Split the Film, and I'll put it here in the Split Film, whoops.
And we can send it out too. We'll send it out to
Oh,
everyone too, but if you know.
yeah, sorry, I put it into just panelists, but it's splitfilm.org. The filmmaker is Ellen Bruno. And you can, there's a trailer right on the website, and I think it's like $6 to download it. Ellen is raising money to fund the making of the second film. So there is a small fee to see the first film. Well worth it. And just one caution, it can be triggering for both adults. We show it in, I train mediators how to do divorce mediations, and we showed it recently in a group of 40 legal professionals, and we had 2 or 3 people break down and have to leave for the day because it was very triggering. It can be very upsetting. I burst into tears the first time I watched it. So just be conscious of that fact. But it is a tool. We use it, by the way, in mediation when we have parents who are unable to see the effect that their actions might have on their children. Or those parents who are in that place Rachel described, where they think, oh, our kids don't know anything. Kids don't, oh, we fight behind closed doors. They don't know. And so many parents show it to the children because it gives children a way to express that they feel like Danny does, or they understand what Mary is saying. But again, always with caution.
Thank you. Is there anything that you want to leave us with at the end here? And I do want to say, for those of you that are getting CEUs, you'll be getting an email tomorrow about what you need to do to get those CEUs for this presentation. But, Susan, I think any parting words, but then also how can we find you, and what can you do with the community of attorneys that are watching this now, therapists, physicians, kind of what would be your availability, or what would you recommend if someone's wanting to get more information from you on mediation or ways they can help their clients better handle divorce or the potential for divorce?
Yeah, it's all great questions. The one thing I'd like to leave everyone with is that understanding that divorce is always a difficult time, and with an addiction issue, alleged or factual, in the mix, it can be very, a very difficult time. It is not a time to rush into things. It is that time for the grace of space, and the focus always shifts to the person with addiction. Much focus should be shifted to the person who does not have the addiction, because they are often the one driving the divorce forward, and they are the one who has that power to give that space. And as Rachel, I think, very eloquently said, the biggest gift you can give your children is 2 healthy parents. And that means the best thing you can do for them, even if a divorce is happening, is give the other parent some space to get healthy. And if they need to do that, not to use their addiction as something to vilify them or make them the bad guy or bad woman in this matter. And that is educating from the get-go, because once the ball gets rolling, once the litigation gets going, there's a lot of bells that cannot be unrung. And once you put into some written pleadings that are public record in a courthouse, that, some of the things I've seen in that paperwork, trust me, it will be there forever. And by the way, your children someday can go look at that paperwork. So be cautious. And then, anybody who'd like to know more about me, Divorce in a Better Way is my website for divorce resources. And then Mostyn Guthrie is our training academy, where we train mediators. We have parenting courses, we have mediation courses, we have for all different kinds of professionals. We actually are adding a brand new high conflict divorce mediation course coming up soon, but that's mostynguthrie.com. So Divorce in a Better Way, or Mostyn Guthrie and the podcast. And I have a wonderful episode. I was just telling Rachel, we did an episode together. It just hit my top 10. She's the number 9 episode. And Climbing Fast on your secrets can make you sick, and how to get beyond those. So that's Divorce and Beyond. That's available at divorceandbeyondpod.com.
But thank you, Susan. Thank you so much for the gift of your time, and thank you for all the work you're doing in this, and it's synergistic to what we do. I very much appreciate you spending the time with us today, gifting that wisdom, and most importantly, the gift of your friendship. It means a lot to me, and I appreciate you letting us get some insight into better ways and healthier ways that we can conduct ourselves when we're going through something that is very difficult. So thank you. Thank you. I cannot say it enough. I appreciate it very much. And that's it. We'll sign off for here. So we'll be talking to you, Susan. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. If
And
anyone
thanks
has
everyone
questions,
for attending.
feel
Yeah,
free to reach out. Susan at divorceandabetterway.com. I'm happy to answer questions separately.
perfect. Thank you, everybody. Your CEU information will be in the email. Bye.